Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the questions going into the offseason for all of the eliminated CFP teams, and one team right on the outside was Miami, and Anthony has a quick question here about Shannon Dawson. And the way that I look at it is Carson Beck is more of a pocket passer rather than what Cam Ward was. I don't think you have to change the scheme by any means. I don't think you have to change the way you go about business or the kind of routes you run or the routes you throw. I think you just have to get a better run game. I think you just have to get better play from your offensive line. So it's not necessarily I think he has to change the way that he calls plays or change the plays that he's calling in general. I do think he just has to get a little bit more from that run game, a little bit more from that offensive line, and then you could be set up for remarkable success. But overall, I don't know. Is he talking about someone for Miami? Because there's a lot of guys, if I'm being totally honest. Transfer portal is one of those things where you see a rumor of a big time guy that could be bouncing off, and you want to look in the portal, but the reality is he might not even be in the portal yet. So it's really hard to get a beat on what those guys look like and what the portal looks like at any moment, because it could be guys that are not in the portal are essentially in the portal, as we've learned over the past couple of years. So I'm not sure exactly who he's talking about. I think there's a number of guys out there that could be big time players for them, but at the end of the day, some big time receivers have already come off the board. So I do wonder if it might just be someone that's on a roster right about now. But we'll get into that in time. Obviously, some more details will come out around that, and we'll definitely touch on that, no doubt about it. But let's jump in here, and we'll start with the quarterbacks, just where all these guys landed, where they are going forward, and we'll start with Carson Beck. He was the number one quarterback in this class. He obviously makes his way to Miami, a great pickup for them, a great situation for him and Shannon Dawson, and hopefully he can do what Cam Ward did and definitely elevate his stock to a top 10 pick going into the 2026 draft. But Anthony, I think there will be a lot of rumors around Ryan Williams, especially, and Jeremiah Smith after this season. That's just kind of inevitable with how good they have been. I don't see either of them leaving where they are. Now, the NIL world is weird, so I can't say anything with confidence by any means, but the way that I see it, I think both those guys are in great positions, particularly Jeremiah Smith, but Ryan Williams might be one that might have a little bit more malleability to it, but at the end of the day, I don't expect either of those guys to leave, but I can't say anything with confidence. That's kind of the end-all be-all for transfer portal is you can say something that you think is going to happen, and then the exact opposite happens. So very well might be those guys. I'd be a little bit surprised, I won't lie to you, but it's definitely something that we could watch and definitely something that would take the college football world by storm. But when you look at the rest of the guys on the quarterback list, obviously John Mateer, huge player for Oklahoma. He's going to have to fix a lot of issues. He's going to have to patch a lot of holes, and he's going to have to be superhero at different times throughout this year. They have a huge spring portal cycle coming up once they get him intact and they figure out what they need on the outside for him. Fernando Mendoza, Miller Moss are two other guys that I think are just going to have really nice years at Indiana and Louisville. I think they're both guys that could very well compete for their conference titles and maybe even a CFP spot depending on how the cookie crumbles for those guys. Luke Kromenhoek and Sagapula Tele are two guys that multi-year guys, hopefully at least multi-year guys at Cal and Mississippi State. I think they're both downright special. I really love what Luke Kromenhoek has done. I love what Mississippi State has done, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But overall, both these guys are very talented. If they stick around in those places for 2 or 3 years, I really think they can be downright stars, even at Mississippi State and Cal. I promise you can still be stars at those programs. And then Darian Mensah, we've talked about quite a bit. That NIL money was very nice, and he is going to be a multiple year guy there, and we'll see how that works out. They kicked Malik Murphy out the door. We'll see if they regret that. Malik Murphy found his way up to Oregon State, so a lot of talent in this group. You also have guys, Jackson Arnold made his way to Auburn. You have Caden Salter going to Colorado, likely to be their starter. Bo Pribula over to Missouri, so tons of guys that have bounced around, that have come off the board, and tons of guys that will continue to come off the board. One of my favorites is Thomas Castellanos down there at Florida State, as well as Mark Gronowski over there at Iowa. Going to be a really fun group to watch, and definitely you have that star power up top. You also have some guys that you might not be thinking about right now, but I think could absolutely explode in 2025. Yeah, I really do think he will, Anthony. I think Luke Kromenhoek is a guy that we don't really know what he is, right? It's very hard to get a beat on what he is exactly when you don't have the tape that you would love to have on the kid. But he has the ability to make a ton of different throws. I do think this offseason with all the first-team reps will do him a lot of different favors and Jeff Lebby with that, elevated offense, with that accelerated offense, makes it a little bit easier for young quarterbacks to just kind of get the ball, make one hitch, find the open receiver, get it out of your hands, and then keep it moving. I think he's going to be really, really effective. And Connor Wegman is a guy I probably should have talked about just a little bit here because he is going to be a remarkable player. That's the one that I love the most, if I'm being totally honest. He is the guy that I think could elevate Houston into a position where maybe they're even competing for a Big 12 title. I really love that pickup, and I definitely think it's one that might just fit absolutely perfectly with what Willie Fritz loves to do. But moving forward to the wide receivers, because that was kind of the biggest group of this portal class, and Eric Singleton was setting the pace. Remarkable player from Georgia Tech. Found his way over to Auburn. Was a little bit of an interesting recruitment throughout that one, but he found his way to Auburn. Zachariah Branch right after him, another speedster, found his way to UGA. So very, very talented guys. Two guys that are incredible players, and I think they're going to make huge effects on their teams in 2025. Frankly, I think both those guys will be the wide receiver one for both those teams. Then you do have guys like Deuce Robinson, Dane Key, Nick Anderson, all guys that are going to be absolutely huge for their teams. I absolutely love Dane Key. I think he's going to be a breakout star. And then you get to Kevin Concepcion, Micah Hudson. Also add Mario Craver to that A&M mix. Really, really good stuff from A&M when you talk about that wide receiver class. Same thing with UGA, same thing with LSU, getting Barry and Brown as well. Really talented guys in this group. And then you look at Notre Dame. Horatio Fields is a huge pickup from Wake Forest. And then you look at another guy they got, Malachi Fields from Virginia. They might just be turning a corner at that wide receiver position when you talk about Notre Dame. And then the guy that I'm watching the closest out of this group, weirdly enough, is Deuce Robinson. I think he can make all the difference in the world, and absolutely is a guy that can make all huge changes. And I just don't have CJ Daniels on this list because he wasn't listed as a top 10 receiver on that 247. Do think he's going to have a massive effect on that team. No doubt about it. He's a very, very talented player, and I do think he can tap into a little bit more of what he had at Liberty than what he had at LSU, but just went off what 247 had here, and they had him, I believe, at 11 or 12, if I'm not mistaken, was right off this list, but remarkably talented guy, and cannot wait to see what he can do at Miami this year. Another guy, Eric Rivers at Georgia Tech, is another guy to watch, kind of that Eric Singleton replacement. Then you got transfer portal defenders, and this is a little bit more of a mixed bag. You do have a lot of defensive ends that are making big-time effects in this one, and Patrick Payton's the one leading the way. I frankly think he's going to be a downright star. I think he's going to explode in that Blake Baker offense. I think he's going to have double-digit sacks, and he's going to be a guy that we look at as maybe the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. I think he is that good, and I think he's in a position to succeed at that level. And then Prince Willem Manuelin followed his brother Princely to Ole Miss. You have Winnowari making all types of plays for Missouri. He's found his way over to Nebraska. Big-time pickup for the Huskers in so many different ways. But then you got the defensive tackle talent. Jaheim Otis, David Blay. I absolutely love this pickup for Miami. I think he's going to be a downright star in 2025. And then David Gusta finding his way to Kentucky, kind of a Deion Walker replacement there. Lee Hunter is another incredible defensive tackle. Romello Height's a guy that I think is going to be a star at Texas Tech and really make himself some money in 2025. So these defenders are downright elite. Takario Davis did make his way back to college over to his old coach in Jed Fish up there in Washington. And then you do have Damon Wilson still on the board, and there's a lot of different teams out there, Anthony. Miami definitely could be in this mix. I've seen Texas, Ohio State, Missouri as kind of the big three teams, but frankly, this one seems to have twists and turns every single day. So I could very well see that finding its way over to Miami. As of right now, I'd lean Ohio State because he had a little bit more a connection to them coming out of high school, but frankly, you could take your pick here and I would totally back you. It's a very, very interesting recruitment and one that is probably the biggest one still left on the board in the portal. And then just look at the top 10 teams as of right now. LSU only has 16 commits, doing a great job pulling in some very quality guys, especially up front on that defensive line, and just patching holes on the back end with guys like Mansour Deline. Then you have Ole Miss doing the Ole Miss thing. Same thing with Florida State, just kind of doing what they do every offseason. Florida State does have to be very careful with this portal class. Definitely one that will probably take a little bit more of a fine-tooth comb over in a couple of weeks because it's definitely one that's going to be a little bit worrisome as we head into this season. But then you do have Auburn done a really, really good job rebuilding that offense, but still have worries about what Jackson Arnold can do in that offense. Then you do have guys like Nebraska making big-time names, Kentucky replacing huge players across that defense. Mississippi State is the one that I've loved the most. They've done an incredible job of building up this team and just elevating the talent level. It's not going to be a great team in 2025. I don't expect them to win the SEC or really be in contention to win the SEC. What I do expect is really concrete steps forward, and I do think that's the biggest thing here is you got to find your guys, and Jeff Lebby is slowly doing that. He's done a great job in the portal this cycle. I think he's going to be a guy that continues to build from this and does really, really awesome things going forward. Florida State's a question to me. I have a million different questions about what Florida State looks like after this year because the reality of their situation is they don't have good enough guys to play in 2025, so they have to go into the portal. But the problem is they lean on the portal a little bit too much because high school recruiting is the bedrock of every great program around the country. So I do think it's going to be a very, very hard tightrope walk for Mike Norvell, and the reality is they come up with a 7-5 record next year. He might just be out the door. So it's going to be a very, very weird year over there in Florida State. And to me, I just don't think they're approaching this the right way. I don't think they did at the beginning, and I think it's catching up to them just a little bit. So that'll be a fascinating thing to watch, but the winter portal has kind of tamped down. Now, you still have guys out there. You have Emmanuel Pregnon as guy you're going to want to watch. Damon Wilson we talked about, but then you have, running backs that have already committed. Justice Haynes to Michigan, Fluff Bothwell to Mississippi State. You have Patrick Kudas going to Ole Miss. Very, very talented players, flew all over the place, and wanted to make sure everyone knew at least grandiose where they all were. We'll definitely get into that in more detail throughout time, but definitely something to watch. And let's take our final break here. And when we come back, I got my top 10 Tuesday for you guys. Just the best players in the national title as I see it. Neither of the quarterbacks made this list. It is a very, very fun list, though. Very, very tough to put together, but I'll roll it out right after this, so stick with us.